a question of particular interest to this audience. Does the media do a good enough job of investigating the federal government?
I have to tell you that the media does an occasionally good job and occasionally a very disappointing job. I know that a lot of what we do is geared to the media, especially when I was in the minority. We would send letters in hopes that the press would follow up with questions. And sometimes the press did. But I'll give you an example of a time when the press did not. And that was right before we moved into Iraq. I'd read that the CIA knew the charge that the United States had found out that the intelligence did not stand up in the claim that Saddam Hussein was trying to get uranium from Africa. It was a hoax. And the CIA knew it was a hoax. And the President, however, said in his State of the Union address, very carefully, we understand from British intelligence, because he was told he couldn't say it from U.S. intelligence, that Saddam Hussein was trying to get uranium from Africa. So I wrote to the President and said, Mr. President, either the CIA didn't tell you what they knew, which would show massive incompetence, or they told you this information and you ignored it in order to sell a war to the American people. The press never followed up with a question. It wasn't until much later that, and especially after Ambassador Wilson wrote his op-ed, that the press realized and the American people started to find out that the CIA knew and some people in the administration knew. I remember Condoleezza Rice saying, if the CIA knew, they never told us. Maybe they knew in the bowels of the CIA, was her words. But then it turned out that her chief of staff was informed by George Tenet himself about this information. I don't think the press did the kind of job you should have done in the early days of the Iraq War and the disinformation that got us into that war.
Following up on that topic, the questioner says last summer Secretary Rice had been scheduled to testify in what was sure to be an explosive hearing about when precisely the Bush administration knew during the run-up to the war in Iraq that its intelligence on Saddam's weapons of mass destruction was wrong. At the last minute, however, that hearing was abruptly postponed and never rescheduled. Will the committee return to that topic in the next few months?
It's a disappointment for me not to have had Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, come in and testify as to her actions when she was the National Security Advisor, because it was her job to bring the information to the President and to gather the correct information to make sure he had all the options to choose from. Hers was an administrative job that was so key to the decision-making at the White House. The President and the White House counsel, or at least the White House counsel, has asserted that this was advice given to the President and therefore not appropriate for the Congress. We have put it on the back burner for now. I would still like to have her before us to answer some of these questions. You know, she never has answered those questions. We were told, oh, she answered those questions already when she was confirmed for Secretary of State. We looked at the record. She wrote in a written reply to a question about it that she didn't know anything about it. That's to the extent that she's answered these questions already for the public. I think we ought to have very clear answers to what she knew and what information she had and what she did about it, especially since her chief deputy and her successor, Mr. Hadley, was told that the information was incorrect, which was the basis for, I think, bringing the American people to the conclusion that war might be necessary, and that was that Saddam Hussein was going to have the most feared weapon of mass destruction of them all, and that was a nuclear weapon based on this claim he was getting uranium from Africa.
If it's on the back burner for now, does that mean there will not be hearings before the election? And why don't you subpoena her?
I don't want you to draw any inference. We're thinking it over, and we'll see what course we might take.
Does that include a subpoena for the Secretary of State?
Maybe, and maybe not.
There's several variations of this question. We'll move on.